I discovered my husband wasn't visiting his mother every Thursday for 20 years. The truth was much more painful, and my revenge was so perfect that even today, at 73 years old, it brings a smile to my face. Hello, my dears. I'm Eleanor. I'm 73 years old, and today I'm going to share a story from my life that I've never told in public before. Before I begin, I'd like to ask you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It would bring me such joy to know my words are reaching so many different places. I was born in 1952 in a small town in Pennsylvania called Maplewood. It was a place where everyone knew each other, where doors were left unlocked, and children played in the streets until dark. My family was humble. My father worked at the steel mill, and my mother took in sewing. We were 5 siblings, and I was the middle child. From a young age, I learned to embroider, cook, and keep house. In those days, girls like me had an almost certain destiny: marry, have children, and take care of the home. In 1968, when I was just 16 years old, our church held its annual summer fair. I was helping at the dessert stand, wearing a light blue dress my mother had made especially for the occasion. It was on that night that I met Richard. He was 26, tall, with dark hair combed back, and a thin mustache that was fashionable at the time. He worked at the post office, drove a green Volkswagen Beetle, and had a way of speaking that made my knees weak. Richard was the dream catch for all the young women in town. He had a steady job, his own car, and talked differently because he had lived in the city. When he began courting me, my friends were dying of envy. I remember it like it was yesterday. He would come to our house on Sundays, always with a simple gift: a flower, a chocolate, a ribbon for my hair. My father was suspicious of the age difference, but my mother said I was lucky. An older man has already settled down in life, daughter. We dated for 2 years, always very respectfully. Richard was patient and affectionate, at least in the beginning. In 1970, we married in a simple ceremony in the same church where we'd met. I wore a white lace dress that my mother and aunts had sewn together over months. I felt like a princess that day, leaving the church arm in arm with him while people threw rice and rose petals. In the photo album I keep to this day, my smile was so big it looked like my face would split in half from happiness. The first years were wonderful. We moved into a simple house in the Springdale neighborhood, with 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours. Richard worked at the post office during the day, and I took care of the house. In 1971, our first son, Jason, was born. 2 years later came Diana, and in 1975, our youngest, Robert. 3 beautiful children who filled our home with noise and joy. Richard was a good father, I can't complain about that. He played with the children, took them to the park on Sundays, told them stories before bed. As a husband, in the beginning, he didn't give me reasons to complain either. We had little money, but we lived with dignity. Sometimes he would bring home a rose or a piece of fabric he knew I would like. He wasn't a man of many words of affection, but he showed his love in his own way. It was in 1973, shortly after Diana's birth, that the famous Thursday nights began. One evening, Richard came home from work and said, "Eleanor, I need to visit my mother every Thursday night. She's been alone since Dad died, and my brothers don't care much about her." Richard's mother, Mrs. Patricia, lived on the other side of town, in the Oak Hill neighborhood. I had only met her twice, at our engagement and at our wedding. She was a thin woman of few words, who didn't seem to like me much. Richard rarely talked about her, and when he did, it was always with a tone of obligation rather than affection. But who was I to question a son who wanted to look after his mother? In those days, a good wife didn't question her husband. And so the routine began. Every Thursday, Richard would come home from work, take a shower, put on that aftershave I loved, dress in a well-pressed shirt that I had prepared especially, and leave around 7 p.m. "I'm going to have dinner with Mom and keep her company," he would say. He always returned after 11, sometimes almost midnight. At first, I didn't suspect anything. I was too busy with 2 small children and all the household chores. Besides, I thought it was nice that he cared about his elderly mother. That's what a good person would do, isn't it? My own mother, who lived in another town, always said, "Look how your husband is such a good son. A man who respects his mother respects his wife." But as the months passed, I began to notice small, strange things. Richard would return from these visits with a different smell, a sweet perfume that wasn't from the aftershave he used. When I mentioned it, he quickly responded, "It's Mom's perfume. She hugs me a lot when I arrive and when I leave." You know how affectionate she is. No, I didn't know. The 2 times I met Mrs. Patricia, she seemed anything but affectionate. She was a serious, almost cold lady, but I swallowed the explanation. Then I started noticing lipstick stains on his shirts. They weren't many, and they were always on the collar or shoulder. When I asked, Richard laughed. "Mom always wears red lipstick, you know, and she covers me with kisses when I visit. Sometimes she forgets that lipstick stains." Again, I swallowed the explanation, even though something inside me began to stir. It was a strange feeling in my stomach, as if I knew something wasn't right but didn't want to admit it. The strangest thing was that Richard never suggested that the children or I accompany him on these visits. When I proposed once, "Maybe next holiday we could all visit your mother," he was quick to respond, "Oh no, she gets nervous with too many people in the house, especially noisy children. It's better if I go alone." That hurt me. After all, we were family. Why wouldn't the grandmother want to know her grandchildren? Why wouldn't the husband want his wife to spend time with his mother-in-law? But in those days, women were taught not to ask too many questions, to blindly trust their husbands, to take care of the home and children, and let the men handle the rest. And so the years passed. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. Richard's Thursdays were sacred. Rain or shine, whether he had a fever or was tired, he never missed a visit to his mother. Sometimes he would come home late and go straight to the shower, even though he had already showered before leaving. "Mom's house is very warm," he would justify. On some occasions, he returned with his shirt wrinkled or with the buttons done up wrong. "I took it off to help Mom change a light bulb," or "I took it off because it was hot, and when I put it back on, I was in a hurry." During all those years, the excuses were always similar, and I always pretended to believe them. Deep down, maybe I already knew the truth, but was afraid to face it. Afraid of the scandal, the shame, of how I would support 3 children alone if the marriage ended. In those days, a divorced woman was looked down upon by society. She would be the failure, the one who couldn't keep her husband. So I kept quiet and moved forward, taking care of my children, keeping the house in order, being the perfect wife I was raised to be. Over time, Richard became more careless. Sometimes he would arrive with lipstick marks on his neck or scratches on his back that he tried to hide. The smell of women's perfume became stronger. Once I found a handkerchief that wasn't mine in his jacket pocket. When I asked, he said his mother had given it to him as a gift. It was a handkerchief with embroidered initials, CM. Mrs. Patricia was Patricia Wilson. Those weren't her initials. Still, I continued pretending to believe. Until we reached 1985, and my world turned upside down on a simple Thursday when the truth finally came to light in a way I could no longer ignore. It was a Thursday in June 1985. I remember it as if it were yesterday. Winter was coming, and that night was especially cold. Robert, our youngest at 10 years old, woke up with a high fever. It was already past 8 p.m. Richard had left almost an hour ago for his weekly visit. The boy was shivering under the covers, 102.2 degrees fever, and I didn't have any fever reducer in the house. Diana, at 12, was trying to calm her brother, while Jason, the oldest at 14, looked at me worriedly. "Mom, Robert's really hot," he said. And he was. My mother's heart raced with that fever that wouldn't break. I needed medicine urgently, but didn't want to leave the children alone to go to the pharmacy, which was 10 blocks away. In those days, we didn't have cell phones, internet, or home delivery for medicines. Everything was more difficult. That's when I had the idea to call Mrs. Patricia's house and ask Richard to stop by the pharmacy on his way back. I had never called there before. It was like a silent agreement between us. His visits to his mother were sacred territory where I didn't interfere, but this was an emergency. Our son was sick. I took the phone book that sat next to the phone on the side table in the living room. Richard had written down his mother's number there. It was a bit faded, but I could still read it. I dialed with trembling fingers while listening to Robert moaning with fever in the bedroom. The phone rang 3, 4, 5 times. I was about to give up when an elderly woman's voice answered. "Hello," she said. I felt immediate relief. "Good evening, this is Eleanor, Mrs. Patricia's daughter-in-law. Could you please call my husband Richard to the phone? It's urgent, our son is sick." There was silence on the other end. A silence that lasted only a few seconds, but to me seemed like an eternity. "Miss, I think you have the wrong number," the voice calmly replied. "There's no Richard here." My heart raced. I thought maybe I had dialed wrong, or that the lady had hearing problems, as many elderly people do. "I'm sorry, but isn't this the phone number for Mrs. Patricia Wilson, Richard Wilson's mother?" Another silence, and then came the words that changed everything. "My dear, my name is Bernice. I've lived in this house for almost 20 years. I bought it from the estate of a lady named Patricia. Yes, but she passed away in 1966. The house was closed for years before I bought it. I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. 1966. Richard and I met in 1968. We married in 1970. His mother had been dead for years when he told me he would be visiting her every Thursday. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice faltering. "Patricia Wilson, a thin lady with gray hair?" "Yes, my dear. The older neighbors told me about her when I moved in. She died of heart problems. She didn't have any children living around here from what they told me. A nephew took care of the estate. She didn't have children. Patricia didn't have children living in town. All the pieces started to fit together." I thanked the lady, hung up the phone, and stood there, holding the receiver in my hand, unable to move. I could feel the blood pulsing in my temples. For 20 years, every Thursday, my husband had lied to me. 20 years of, "I'm going to visit Mom." 20 years of different perfume on his shirts. 20 years of lipstick that wasn't mine. 20 years of excuses that I pretended to believe. I sat down slowly on the sofa, trying to process that revelation. Tears were running down my face when Jason appeared in the living room. "Mom, Robert's getting worse. Did you get hold of Dad?" That question brought me back to reality. My son was sick. It wasn't time to fall apart. I quickly wiped away my tears, took a deep breath, and made a decision. "Jason, stay with your siblings. I'm going to the pharmacy to get the medicine." I put on a coat, took some money I kept in a cookie jar in the kitchen, and went out. The night was dark and cold, but I barely felt the cutting wind on my face. My mind was buzzing with unanswered questions, with anger, with sadness, with a feeling of having been made a fool of for so long. I got to the pharmacy, bought the fever reducer, and returned home. We gave Robert the medicine, and gradually he improved. I put all 3 children to bed, even Jason, who insisted he was too old to be tucked in. Then I sat in the armchair in the living room, in the dark, and waited. I waited for hours, staring at the door, mentally rehearsing what I would say when Richard arrived. The hours dragged on the wall clock. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight. At 12:15, I heard the beetle parking in front of the house. Then, footsteps on the porch, the key turning in the lock. The door opened, and Richard entered, his hair slightly disheveled, and with that smell of women's perfume I knew so well. He was startled to see me sitting in the dark. "Eleanor, what are you doing up at this hour?" he asked with a tone of surprise in his voice. He turned on the lamp beside the armchair. I wanted him to see my face when I spoke. "Robert has a high fever. I had to go to the pharmacy alone because you weren't here to help." "Why didn't you call me at your mom's house? I would have stopped by the pharmacy," he replied, taking off his coat and hanging it on the coat rack near the door. It was at that moment that I realized how comfortable he was with the lie. It wasn't something occasional, a slip. It was a lifestyle for him, a farce so well rehearsed that he didn't even need to think before continuing it. "I did call," I replied calmly. I saw his body freeze for an instant, as if he had received a shock. Then, slowly, he turned to me. "I called the number you left written in the phone book. Do you know who answered? A lady named Bernice, who has lived in that house for almost 20 years. She told me an interesting story, Richard. She told me she bought the house from the estate of Mrs. Patricia, who died in 1966. His face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I continued, keeping my voice low so as not to wake the children. Your mother died before we even met, Richard. Before we started dating, before you told me you needed to visit her every Thursday." He swallowed hard, ran his hand through his hair, and then did what men like him always do. He tried to turn the tables. "Are you crazy? Of course my mother didn't die in 66. It must have been another Patricia. You called the wrong number." I rose slowly from the armchair. In my eyes, there were no more tears, only a cold determination that I never knew I possessed until that moment. "Don't lie to me anymore. It's over, Richard. 20 years of lies is enough." He changed tactics, seeing that denial wasn't working. His face took on an expression of remorse. His shoulders fell. "Eleanor, I can explain. It's just that I didn't want to hurt you." "Spare me," I interrupted. "I don't want to hear any more lies. I want to know the truth. Where have you been going every Thursday for 20 years? He avoided my gaze, staring at the floor. They're work meetings, post office things. You wouldn't understand. More lies, more flimsy excuses. At that moment, something inside me broke, or perhaps it strengthened. I'm not sure. I only know that I made a decision that would change the course of my life forever. "All right, Richard. If you don't want to tell me the truth, I'll find out myself." He looked up, surprised. Perhaps he didn't expect this reaction from me, the submissive wife who had always accepted everything silently. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that next Thursday, I'm going to find out where you really go and what you do." He laughed nervously. "Don't be ridiculous. You're going to follow me, is that it? Like in those romance novels you read?" I didn't respond. I just stared at him in silence, holding his gaze until he looked away, uncomfortable. That night we slept in separate beds for the first time in 20 years of marriage. He in our bedroom, me on the living room sofa. I couldn't sleep a wink. I mentally relived each Thursday, each excuse, each sign that I had voluntarily ignored for so long, and planned my next move. The following week passed in a blur. I took care of the house and children, as always. I prepared meals, washed and ironed clothes, including the shirt Richard would wear on Thursday. We spoke only when necessary. The children noticed the tension, but didn't ask questions. On Thursday, Richard came home from work, showered, and got ready as usual. He seemed nervous, glancing at me sideways as he prepared. "I'm going out," he announced dryly. "Your mother died almost 20 years ago, Richard," I replied in the same tone. "Where are you really going?" He took the car keys, not looking me in the eye. "That's none of your business." And he left, slamming the door. I waited 10 minutes. I had everything planned. I asked our neighbor, Mrs. Betty, to keep an eye on the children for just an hour. I put a scarf on my head and sunglasses, even though it was night. I took the money I had saved for emergencies and went to the taxi stand. "Follow that green Beetle," I asked the driver, pointing to Richard's car, which had just turned the corner. The taxi driver looked at me suspiciously, but when I put the money in his hands, he nodded and started the car. We followed the Beetle for about 20 minutes to an area of town I rarely frequented, a region with bars and nightclubs. Richard parked in front of an establishment with a discreet sign, the Mirage Club. I asked the taxi driver to stop at a safe distance. I paid the fare and got out. I watched from afar as Richard entered the place. Then, taking a deep breath, I walked over there. At the door, a large-bodied man controlled the entrance. I hesitated for a moment, but determination spoke louder than fear. I approached and asked what kind of place it was. "It's a swingers club," the man replied, looking me up and down. "People who like variety, if you know what I mean." I understood perfectly. It was a place where couples swapped partners, a place for consensual cheating, but cheating nonetheless. For 20 years, while I raised our children and maintained our home, Richard had been frequenting that den every Thursday. I didn't enter the club. I didn't need to see anything else. I returned home by taxi with a clarity I had never felt before. Now I knew exactly what I needed to do. When I got home that night, the children were already asleep. I thanked Mrs. Betty, who looked at me with those curious eyes but was kind enough not to ask questions. I sat at the kitchen table under the dim light of the lamp and sat there motionless for hours. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up inside me. What I felt was a strange mixture of pain, anger, and surprisingly, relief. Relief at finally facing the truth that, deep down, I had always known. Relief at no longer having to pretend I didn't see the lipstick stains, that I didn't smell the strange perfume, that I didn't notice the flimsy excuses. Richard arrived after midnight, as usual, entered silently, probably expecting me to be asleep. But there I was sitting in the dim kitchen. When he saw me, he stopped at the door. "You followed me?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I replied simply. He ran his hand through his hair in a nervous gesture that I knew so well after 2 decades together. "Eleanor, it's not what you're thinking." "It's exactly what I'm thinking, Richard. A swingers club. While I took care of our children, you were there every Thursday for 20 years. He tried to explain, said it was just fun, that it didn't mean anything, that he loved me anyway, the same empty excuses that men like him always give. I didn't respond. I just got up, walked past him, and went to Diana's room. I slept there that night, hugging my daughter, who in her sleep asked me why I was in her bed. "I just wanted to be close to you, my love," I answered softly. In the days that followed, Richard tried everything, brought flowers, chocolates, promised he would never go to that place again, swore I was the only woman he truly loved. I listened in silence, accepted the gifts, but didn't say yes or no to his promises. I needed time to think, to plan. Because you see, my dears, I was born in 1952, a time when divorced women were frowned upon by society. We were raised to accept, to forgive, to keep the family together at any cost. Men are just like that, the older ladies would say. Be thankful he comes home every night, as if living on crumbs was all we deserved. But something had changed inside me. Maybe it was the humiliation of discovering that probably the whole town knew about Richard's double life, except me. Maybe it was the exhaustion of 2 decades of lies. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of a new era. It was 1985 after all, and even in small towns, things were beginning to change for women. I remember reading in a magazine about divorces, about women who started over, who worked outside the home, who supported themselves. For a month, I kept up appearances. I continued to be the dedicated wife I had always been. I cooked Richard's favorite dishes, ironed his shirts with perfect creases, smiled when he came home from work. He seemed relieved, thinking I had gotten over what happened, that everything would return to normal. But meanwhile, I was planning each step, each detail. I started saving a little of the grocery money every week. Not much, just enough not to be missed in the household budget. I hid the bills inside an oatmeal can at the back of the kitchen cabinet. Next, I looked for a job. It wasn't easy. I was 33 and had never worked outside the home. My only talents were those of a housewife, cooking, sewing, taking care of children. It was Mrs. Betty who gave me the idea. "Eleanor, you sew so well. My nieces are turning 15. They're twins. Their mother is desperate to find someone who can make the dresses for a reasonable price. And so I began. First, sewing dresses for Mrs. Betty's nieces. Then other girls in the neighborhood found out and sought me out. Soon, I was sewing party dresses, doing small repairs, alterations to clothes, all discreetly while Richard was at work. The money went straight into my oatmeal can. I also began gathering important documents, the children's birth certificates, our marriage certificate, house documents. I made copies of everything and kept them in a folder that I hid at my sister Louise's house, who lived in Pine Harbor, 2 hours away. In casual conversations, I began to sound out the children about a possible move. What if one day we went to live at Aunt Louise's house near the beach? Would you like that? Jason, in his rebellious teenage phase, shrugged. Whatever. Diana got excited about the idea of living near the sea. Robert, always sensitive, asked, "And is Dad coming too?" These conversations broke my heart, but I knew it was necessary to prepare them. I knew that in the end, it would be better for everyone. A home without lies, even with less material comfort, would be healthier than a house built on 2 decades of betrayal. My next action was to open a bank account in my name. In those days, this wasn't so common for married women, but the bank manager, Mrs. Elisa, a middle-aged woman with understanding eyes, helped me without asking too many questions. "It's always good for a woman to have her own money, Mrs. Eleanor," she said as we signed the papers. "You never know what tomorrow will bring." She couldn't imagine how much those words meant to me at that moment. For 6 long months, I lived this double life. On the outside, the conforming wife who had forgiven her husband's infidelity. On the inside, a woman determined to build a way out for herself and her children. The oatmeal can was replaced by a shoebox, then by 2, hidden at the back of the wardrobe under old blankets that Richard never touched. My small sewing business grew. After the party dresses came orders for curtains, bedspreads, christening clothes. I worked while the children were at school and Richard at work. At night, after everyone was asleep, I sometimes stayed up until dawn, finishing some piece, with the dim light of the lamp so as not to draw attention. In September 1985, I visited my sister Louise in Pine Harbor. I told Richard I was going to help her with the preparations for my nephew's birthday. In reality, I went to finalize the details of our move. Louise, who had always been my confidant, knew everything. "Are you sure about this, Eleanor?" she asked worriedly. "Raising 3 children alone won't be easy." "I'm sure, Louise. I've been raising 3 children practically alone for years. At least now I won't have to pretend I don't know my husband is at a swingers club every Thursday." She nodded and hugged me tightly. "This house is yours too, my sister. You can stay as long as you need to." I returned home with a lighter heart. I had a plan, I had savings, I had a place to go. I just needed to choose the right moment. I decided it would be Thursday, November 7th, 1985. A common date, nothing special. But for me, it would be the day of my liberation. That week I intensified the preparations, discreetly packed some clothes and personal items, putting them in old suitcases at the back of the basement where Richard rarely went. I transferred almost all the money from my secret account to my sister's account, leaving just enough for bus tickets and some immediate needs. I had an honest conversation with Jason, my oldest son, who was now 14. I didn't tell him everything, but enough for him to understand the seriousness of the situation. "Son, soon we're going to make an important change. You'll need to be strong and help me with your siblings." He looked at me with those eyes so similar to his father's, but with a compassion that Richard never had. "It's because of Dad's lies, isn't it? His Thursdays." I was shocked. I didn't expect him to know. "How did you—" "Mom, I'm 14 now, not a child anymore. His friends from the post office come here, drink beer with him on Sundays. None of them ever mentioned Thursday meetings. And there's the smell of perfume when he comes back. I'm not stupid." I hugged my son with tears in my eyes. He had grown up without me realizing it, observing the world around him with a clarity that I at his age didn't have. "Yes, son, that's why." We can't live like this anymore." He nodded. "Really? I'll help you, Mom. You can count on me." On November 7th, a Thursday like so many others, Richard left at 7 p.m. as usual for his weekly visit. As soon as the Green Beetle turned the corner, we sprang into action. Jason went to the basement to get the suitcases. Diana and Robert, whom I had prepared by saying we were going on a surprise trip, helped carry small bags with their favorite toys and school books. I called a taxi. When it arrived, we loaded our few belongings and set off for the bus station. On the way, I stopped at the bank and withdrew all the money from the joint account I had with Richard. It wasn't much. He never let me know exactly how much we had, but it was ours. Built with the work of both of us during those 20 years. At the bus station, we bought tickets for the 9 p.m. bus to Pine Harbor. The children were excited about the adventure, not fully understanding what was happening. Jason, however, maintained a serious expression, his eyes attentive to my every move, ready to help. Before boarding, I went to a phone booth and called Mrs. Betty's house. I asked her to deliver an envelope to Richard when he returned. Inside was just a note written in the same careful handwriting with which I had signed the children's school notes for so many years. "I went to visit your mother in the cemetery. Don't wait up for me." I boarded that bus, feeling a mixture of fear and liberation. The children soon fell asleep, lulled by the movement. Looking out the window, seeing the city lights fading behind us, I was certain that despite all the difficulties I would face, I was doing the right thing. It wasn't just for me, it was for my children. So they would grow up in an environment of truth, not lies. It was to show them that no one, not even the mother they so admired, should accept being treated with disrespect. It was so that my Diana, especially, would learn early on that a woman doesn't need to settle for crumbs of attention or live in the shadow of a man's lies. That's how, at 33, with 3 children to raise and just a few suitcases of clothes, I left behind 20 years of marriage and embarked on a journey that, although frightening, would be the beginning of my true life. A life built by me, on my terms, with my own hands. The first months in Pine Harbor were difficult, I won't lie to you. We arrived at my sister Louise's house that November night in 1985, exhausted from the journey, carrying not just our few suitcases, but also the weight of uncertainty. Louise welcomed us with open arms, as she had promised. Her apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, but she didn't hesitate to give one of them to me and the children. "Stay as long as you need," she said, helping us accommodate our luggage. "This house is now yours too." During those first weeks, I oscillated between moments of fierce determination and periods of overwhelming doubt. At night, after the children were asleep, all 3 squeezed into a double bed while I made do with a mattress on the floor. I sometimes cried silently, questioning if I had done the right thing, not for the lack of Richard, but for the comfort and security we had left behind. Richard called Louise's house 3 days after our departure. From what my sister told me, he was furious, alternating between threats and pleas. He wanted to talk to me, demanded to know where his children were. Louise, always protective, said only that we were fine and that we didn't want contact. He showed up there a week later. I was working. I had gotten a job at a small clothing workshop thanks to my sewing skills. The children were at school. Louise faced Richard alone. He looked like a different man, she told me that night. Disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes, smelling of alcohol, he yelled, banged on the door, threatened to call the police. The neighbors almost intervened. "What did you tell him?" I asked worriedly. "The truth, that you finally had the courage to do what you should have done 20 years ago, that if he really cared about his family, he wouldn't have lied for so long, that the children were fine but didn't want to see him now." This last part wasn't entirely true. Robert, my sensitive youngest, asked about his father almost every day. Diana oscillated between anger and longing. Jason, the oldest, maintained a stoic posture, rarely mentioning Richard, prematurely assuming the role of the man of the house. Richard returned 2 more times. On the 3rd, Louise threatened to call the police, and he didn't return. Instead, he began sending letters. Long letters, begging for forgiveness, promising change, swearing eternal love. Letters that I read alone at night and then kept in a shoebox under my improvised bed. I never replied. In January 1986, I managed to rent a small house 2 blocks from the beach. It was modest, 2 bedrooms, living room, and kitchen, but it was ours. I paid 3 months' rent in advance with the savings I had brought with me. The children were excited to have their own space again, especially being so close to the sea. I enrolled them in the local school. It was harder for Jason, who was entering high school and had to leave behind his childhood friends. Diana adapted more easily, her sociable nature soon attracting new friendships. Robert, always more introspective, took longer to adjust, but found comfort in the long walks we took together on the beach at the end of the day. My job at the workshop paid little, but it was regular. I supplemented the income by doing sewing services at home on weekends and evenings. Curtains, dresses, clothing alterations, anything that brought in a few extra dollars. They were months of tightness, of counting every penny, of inventing excuses not to buy the fashionable sneakers Jason wanted or the doll Diana saw on television. But you know what I discovered during that first difficult year? I discovered a strength within me that I didn't know existed, a resilience that surprised me. And, more importantly, I discovered that my children were even stronger and more adaptable than I had imagined. In June 1986, a lawyer located us. Richard was filing for divorce and wanted custody of the children. I panicked. I didn't have money to hire a lawyer, and the idea of losing my children was unbearable. It was Louise who saved me again. Remember Michael, Mrs. Carmela's son? He graduated in law and opened an office here in Pine Harbor. Let's talk to him. Michael had grown up in the same neighborhood as us in Maplewood. He was a few years older than me, but he remembered my family. He listened to my story attentively, without judgments, occasionally making notes on a yellow pad. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said when I finished speaking, "your husband has no chance of getting custody of the children. No judge will take 3 children away from a mother who clearly loves them and takes good care of them, especially considering the circumstances of the separation." "But I have no way to prove his infidelities," I argued. "I never took photos, never kept evidence." Michael smiled gently. "You abandoned your home of 20 years and moved to another town, with just the clothes on your back and 3 children to raise. No judge will believe you did this without a very serious reason." He was right. The divorce process was contentious, with Richard using every possible tactic to discredit me. He alleged abandonment of the home, emotional instability, even insinuated that I had a lover, an irony that almost made me laugh during one of the hearings. But Michael was brilliant, and the judge, an elderly man with keen eyes, seemed to see through Richard's lies. In the end, I got the divorce and custody of the children. Richard was granted visitation rights and the obligation to pay child support, an amount that rarely arrived complete and eventually stopped coming altogether. "Don't worry about that now," Michael advised when I cried in frustration after months of receiving nothing. "We'll file an enforcement action when the time is right. For now, focus on stabilizing your life." That's exactly what I did. At the end of 1986, one of the clients for whom I made custom dresses, Mrs. Helen, wife of a local businessman, made me a proposal that would change our lives. "Eleanor, you have an exceptional talent with needle and thread. Why not open your own atelier? I have a small space downtown that's empty. I can rent it to you for a fair price and even help promote your work among my friends." The idea terrified and excited me at the same time. Open my own business? Me, who had never managed anything but a household, who had barely completed elementary school. It seemed crazy. But then, one Sunday night, I saw Jason bent over his school books, studying with a determination that moved me. Diana was beside him, drawing dress models she had seen in a magazine, dreaming of being a designer one day. Robert was playing on the carpet with cheap plastic cars, poor substitutes for the toys he had left behind. At that moment, I made my decision, not just for me, but for them, for their dreams, for their future. I accepted Mrs. Helen's proposal. Eleanor's Stitches opened its doors in March 1987. It was a tiny space with just 2 sewing machines, one of them borrowed from Louise, and a fitting room improvised with curtains I had made myself. On the walls, I hung some of my work: a simple but elegant wedding dress, a set of curtains with elaborate finishing, a colorful patchwork quilt I had made in my spare time. The first months were slow, with few clients beyond Mrs. Helen's friends. I worked Monday through Saturday, often late into the night. Jason, now 16, helped by taking care of his younger siblings. When I wasn't home, he never complained, though I knew this prevented him from having the normal adolescence he deserved. One afternoon, an elegant lady entered the store. She introduced herself as Cecilia, owner of a boutique in the newly opened shopping mall in town. She had seen a party dress I made for Mrs. Helen's daughter and wanted to know if I could create a small, exclusive collection for her store. "I need 20 pieces to start," she said, flipping through her notebook. "Dresses, skirts, blouses, something sophisticated but accessible. I can pay half in advance to cover materials." It was more work than I could do alone, but also an opportunity I couldn't refuse. I hired 2 seamstresses, older ladies, skilled, who had worked in clothing factories that closed during the economic crisis. I taught them my style, my quality standard, my attention to detail. The collection for Cecilia's boutique was a success. Soon, other stores began placing orders. In 1988, I had to move to a larger space and hire more employees. We didn't get rich overnight. They were difficult times for the country, with rampant inflation and economic instability. But for the first time since we left Maplewood, we no longer needed to count every penny to make it to the end of the month. In 1990, 5 years after our escape on that November night, something happened that I never expected. Jason, about to turn 19, came home from school with an official envelope. "I did it, Mom," he said, his eyes shining. "I got into the State University for engineering." I was paralyzed, looking at that letter with my son's name. My son, who was born in a small house in a small town, son of a housewife with little education and a post office worker. My son, who was now going to university, the first person in our family to go so far. That night, we had a small celebration. Louise came bringing a cake. Diana, now 17 and working part-time in my store while finishing high school, decorated the house with colored ribbons. Robert, at 15, more talkative and confident than he had ever been in Maplewood, played some songs on the guitar he had received the previous Christmas, a gift I could buy with money from my own business. Sitting at that table, looking at my smiling children, at my sister who had been my safe harbor, at the modest but cozy house that was now truly ours. I had managed to buy it the year before after saving every penny. I felt a wave of gratitude so intense it left me breathless. Louise, noticing my emotion, squeezed my hand across the table. "You did it, little sister," she whispered. "Look at all this. Look at what you've built." And it was true. From nothing, with only courage and determination, I had built a new life. A life that, although full of challenges, was authentic. It was mine. A life without lies, without mysterious Thursdays, without the constant weight of betrayal on my chest. Later, after everyone had gone to sleep, I sat on the small back porch, looking at the stars above the sea that shimmered in the distance. I thought about the path traveled, the nights of tears, the days of doubt, the constant fear of not being able to support my children. I thought about Richard, too. I knew, from mutual acquaintances, that he had remarried a few years after our divorce. A much younger woman who worked as a receptionist at the post office. I sincerely hoped he had changed, that he was a better husband to her than he was to me. Not for him, but for her. As for me, I never remarried. I had some romances over the years, one particularly significant with a history professor I met when I went back to school to complete my high school education at 40. But I never felt the need to make anything official. I had learned to value my independence, my freedom of choice, my ability to build my own path. That night, Looking at the stars in 1990, I couldn't imagine what the future still held. I didn't know that my small shop would expand to 3 units in the following years. I didn't know that Diana would indeed become a designer, studying fashion design and eventually taking over the business I started. I didn't know that Robert would find his calling in music, becoming a respected teacher at the local conservatory. I didn't know that Jason would graduate with honors and build a brilliant career, marry, and give me 2 adorable grandchildren. I knew none of this that night. I only knew that I had made the right decision in November 1985, that I had found the courage to say enough to the lies and start anew, and that this courage, this refusal to accept less than I deserved, had made all the difference. Today, sitting in this comfortable armchair at 73, looking out the window at the sea that welcomed me when I arrived here with nothing but 3 children and a few suitcases, I feel a peace I never imagined possible on that November night in 1985. Time, my dears, is the greatest teacher we have and also the gentlest of comforters. The 1990s passed like a whirlwind of transformations, not just for me and my family, but for the entire country. We saw a president be impeached, a stock market boom, inflation finally being tamed. While the country reinvented itself, I too continued my journey of transformation. By 1995, Eleanor's Stitches was no longer just a small neighborhood store. We had 3 units spread throughout the coastal region, and our atelier supplied exclusive pieces to several boutiques in Boston. We weren't a big company, I never had that ambition, but we were known for impeccable quality and personalized service. Diana, who had always shown talent for design, returned from New York that year with a fashion design diploma under her arm and ideas bubbling in her head. I remember her spreading her sketches on the kitchen table, talking animatedly about trends, innovative fabrics, new markets to explore. "Mom, we need to have our own clothing line with our own label. We can't just be the atelier that sews for others anymore." I confess, the idea scared me. I was 43 at the time, and although my business was growing, I still saw myself as the simple seamstress who fled with her children on a Thursday night. Creating my own brand seemed too big a dream, but Diana insisted with that determination that, I must admit, she inherited from me. She showed me spreadsheets, market research, detailed drawings. She had done her homework during her college years. "Trust me, Mom," she said, holding my hands calloused from so many years of work with needle and thread. "We can do this together." And so, Eleanor and Diana was born. Our first own collection launched in the spring of 1996. It was a line of elegant but comfortable women's clothing for middle-aged women who, like me, valued quality and good taste without ostentation. We used natural fabrics, subtle colors with touches of vibrancy, and a cut that favored real women, not just the young models in magazines. It was an immediate success among our regular clients, and soon we began to attract a new audience. By the end of that year, we had to expand our team of seamstresses and rent a larger space for the central atelier. Jason, who was already working as an engineer in a construction company in Boston, returned on weekends and helped me with the administrative and financial part of the business. Robert, who had found his vocation in music, gave guitar and piano lessons at the local conservatory, but always found time to play at our store openings or special events. It was a life I could never have imagined while washing Richard's lipstick-stained shirts or pretending to believe his excuses about visits to his deceased mother. A life built with my own hands, decision by decision, day by day. In 1998, I received a call that left me perplexed. It was Mrs. Betty, my old neighbor from Maplewood. We hadn't spoken in years, although we had occasionally exchanged Christmas cards. "Eleanor, I have news about Richard," she said after the initial greetings. "I thought you might want to know." My heart beat a little faster. Despite all the years that had passed, his name still had the power to awaken complex emotions in me. "He's sick, Eleanor. Pancreatic cancer in an advanced stage. The doctors gave him a few months." I was silent, processing the news. I didn't feel joy at his suffering, but I didn't feel the pain I once thought I would either. It was more like a strange emptiness, as if we were talking about a character from a book I had read long ago. "He asked about you and the children," continued Mrs. Betty. "I think he'd like to see you all one last time." After hanging up, I sat on the porch for hours, looking at the sea, thinking about what to do. I called Jason first, then Diana and Robert. I told them about their father's condition and left the decision in their hands. They were adults now, with the right to choose if they wanted to say goodbye to the man who had fathered them but had been absent for so many important moments in their lives. To my surprise, all three decided to go. Jason, then 27, was the most pragmatic. "We need to close this chapter, Mom. For us, not for him." Diana, at 25, showed more ambivalence. "I don't know what I feel for him, but I know I don't want to carry regrets." Robert, the sensitive youngest at 23, was the most emotional. "He's still my father, despite everything." As for me, I decided not to go. Not out of resentment or anger. Those feelings had dissolved long ago, like salt in the sea, but because there was nothing more to be said between us. Our chapter had been closed on that November night in 1985 when I left that note on the kitchen table. Richard passed away 3 months later, in February 1999. My children were with him in the last weeks, each in their own way, making peace with the imperfect father they had. They told me that in the end, he expressed regret for his choices, for all he lost by prioritizing his Thursday adventures. "He said you were the bravest woman he ever knew, Mom," Robert told me after the funeral. "He said it took him years to understand what you did and why." Those words brought a closure I didn't know I still needed. They didn't change the past, but somehow they softened its edges in my memory. The turn of the millennium came with celebrations throughout the country. In our house by the sea, we gathered the extended family we had built over the years. Louise, of course, now with gray hair but still with that contagious energy, her children and grandchildren, some employees who had become almost family, dear friends made along the way. Jason brought Jennifer, the engineer he met at work and whom he would marry the following year. Diana was between relationships, focused on expanding our clothing line to include a men's collection. Robert came with his partner Michael, a violinist he met at the conservatory, a relationship that in the 70s would have been forced to hide in the shadows but now could flourish in daylight. Looking at that abundant table, at those beloved faces, I felt a wave of gratitude so intense I could barely breathe. Not because everything had been easy, it hadn't. There had been years of financial tightness, nights of working to exhaustion, constant worries about how to pay the bills, how to give my children the opportunities they deserved. But we had done it together, step by step, day by day, building a life worth living. A life based on truth, mutual respect, honest work. The 2000s brought their own challenges and joys. Technology advanced at a pace that sometimes left me dizzy. I, who grew up in an era when a telephone was a luxury item, now had a cell phone and was learning, with the infinite patience of my grandchildren, to use the internet. Our family business adapted to the new times. Diana, always ahead of her time, insisted we needed a website and to sell our clothes online. Jason, who now had his own consulting firm, helped us navigate this new digital world. In 2005, at 53, I made a decision that surprised many. I went back to school. I enrolled in a business administration course to finally formally learn what I had practiced by intuition and necessity for decades. I sat in classrooms among students who could have been my children, sometimes even grandchildren, absorbing knowledge that would have transformed my life had I acquired it 30 years earlier. But I don't regret the timing. Each phase of life has its own learnings, its unique revelations. At 53, I had the wisdom of experience to contextualize academic theories, to see beyond the books and understand the human nuances behind business models. In 2010, when I graduated, Jason and Diana organized a surprise party that left me speechless. They invited former employees of Eleanor's Stitches, longtime clients, course professors, friends made over decades. It was a celebration not just of my late graduation, but of the entire journey that had brought me there. That same year, I made another important decision. I passed the daily management of the company to Diana and a team of talented young people she had gathered. I didn't retire completely. To this day, I still design some special pieces and attend to old clients who insist on being served by me. But I stepped aside, making room for new generations to bring their fresh ideas, their energy, their vision of the future. This freer time allowed me to fulfill another old dream: travel. Not luxurious trips to exotic destinations, but meaningful journeys. I visited the small town in Pennsylvania where I was born, reconnecting with distant cousins and childhood places. I went to New York with Louise, where we took photos like tourists at the Statue of Liberty and spent lazy afternoons in Central Park. Two gray-haired ladies sipping coffee and watching the parade of bronzed youth. In 2015, at 63, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was a period of intense fear, not so much for the possibility of death, which never excessively terrified me, but for the potential suffering, for the possibility of becoming a burden to my children whom I had struggled so hard to raise with independence. But as in so many other moments in my life, I found strength where I didn't know it existed. I faced surgeries, chemotherapy, radiation. I lost my hair, which was beginning to turn completely white, and gained scars that tell stories of invisible battles. And I won, not alone. I was never alone since that November night in 1985. My children took turns accompanying me to treatment sessions. My grandchildren, I had 4 by then, made colorful drawings to decorate my room during hospitalizations. My former employees, many already retired like me, brought homemade soups and company during the slow afternoons of recovery. Today, 8 years later, I'm considered cured. Each semi-annual checkup brings confirmation that that battle at least was won. Sitting here at 73, looking back, I see a life I never imagined for myself when I was an 18-year-old bride in 1970. A life with its pains and losses, yes, but also with joys so deep, achievements so significant, connections so genuine. If I could go back in time and talk to that 33-year-old Eleanor, sitting at the kitchen table on that night in 1985, discovering that her husband was lying about visiting his deceased mother, what would I tell her? I would tell her to have the courage to take that leap into the dark, even without knowing where she would land. I would say yes. There will be nights of silent crying when the children are asleep. There will be moments of cruel doubt, of paralyzing fear, of exhaustion so deep that it seems impossible to get up the next day. But I would also tell her that beyond these dark nights, there are glorious dawns. There is the indescribable satisfaction of building something with your own hands. There is the pride of seeing children grow into integral and compassionate adults, despite, or perhaps because of, the difficulties they faced. There are true friendships, forged in the fire of shared adversities. There is love, different types of love, more mature, more honest than the one she knew at 16. Above all, I would tell her what I now know with certainty. True security doesn't come from a marriage, a house, a stable job. True security comes from within, the certainty that whatever happens, you will find a way. The confidence that each obstacle is just an opportunity to discover a strength you didn't know you possessed. Today, when my grandchildren ask me what was the most important decision of my life, I don't hesitate. It was that November night when I decided I deserved more than crumbs of respect, more than well-rehearsed lies, more than a life lived in the shadows of Thursday. It was when I decided that the truth, however painful, was preferable to the comfort of feigned ignorance. It was when I chose the harder path, not knowing it would also be the most rewarding. And that's what I wish for you, my dears, who are watching me. Courage to seek your truth, even when the path seems frightening. Strength to rebuild as many times as necessary, and the wisdom to recognize that sometimes what seems like the end of everything is just the wonderful, frightening, glorious beginning of a new journey. If my story touched your heart, please leave your like, Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and share with someone who might need to hear these words today. And tell me in the comments if any part of my journey resonated with your own life. Because believe this old lady who has seen many seasons pass, no matter how dark the night, the sun always, always rises again.